It was evening, and we were on a ship called Nellie sailing on the Thames River. London was behind us. On board were the ship's captain, some guests like a lawyer and an accountant, me, and my friend Milo. We all loved stories about the sea. Milo, my friend, was a sailor and loved telling tales. He said something about the old days when the Romans came here. He believed that taking over other places wasn't right. Then he shared a story about sailing on a big river. After coming back from far away, Milo didn't have much to do. He wanted to explore Africa and found a job with a company that traded there. To get the job, he had to go to Brussels to sign papers and see a doctor. The doctor measured his head and talked about strange things like anger. Milo's aunt helped him get the job. She thought he was going to Africa to help people. But Milo knew the company cared more about making money than helping others. I sailed on a French ship to Africa. We stopped at different ports to unload soldiers and customs officers. As we sailed along the coast, I saw the start of the vast jungle and some trading posts. Days passed, and we kept stopping while soldiers and officers got off. Once, we saw a French warship firing into the jungle, aiming at hidden enemies, but nothing really happened. Finally, we reached the mouth of a great river. My boss was waiting for me 200 miles up the river. At the first trading post, I saw ruined machines and weak African prisoners. Further along, I heard explosions from the companies digging near the river. Around me were sick workers left to die. It was awful. Back at the trading post, I met the company accountant, very well dressed and organized, speaking highly of someone called Kurtz. The next part of the journey was hard. We walked for 200 miles, rarely seeing others and finding deserted villages. Some people traveling with me fell ill, and one even wanted to punish the locals. At the central station, chaos reigned, and the manager informed me that the steamer I was supposed to command had sunk. The manager seemed inept, and I felt uneasy about the situation. He mentioned Mr. Kurtz and warned of uncertainty up the river. The repairs on the steamer would take at least 3 months before we could head upstream. I started repairing the sunken steamer as soon as possible. The station was quite busy, but not much seemed to get done. People got excited whenever they mentioned ivory. It was almost like a religion. One night, a fire broke out at the station. I overheard the manager and another man talking about Kurtz. Then, the manager left, and I had a chat with a young agent. He talked about wanting his own station to make money from ivory. He mentioned a painting of Liberty by Kurtz. When I asked about Kurtz, the agent praised him, thinking I knew a lot about the company. He warned me not to give Kurtz a wrong impression about him. It seemed that Kurtz's arrival had disrupted things for both the agent and the manager. While the agent spoke, I pondered the vastness of the jungle and the significance of Kurtz's presence. I pretended to be important to help Kurtz. The agent argued that even a genius like Kurtz needed ordinary people around him. I then asked for rivets to fix the steamer, thinking the agent would help. However, he coldly stated he only followed the manager's orders. He changed the topic, mentioning a hippopotamus that was never hunted successfully. He hinted that only animals have luck in Africa, not humans, Before walking away, I spoke to the boilermaker about getting the rivets. We were thrilled at the thought of real work after waiting for weeks. But instead of the rivets, the El Dorado expedition arrived. They were greedy ivory hunters who knew nothing about Africa or its people. They just wanted ivory to sell for money. They didn't care about anything else. One of them was the manager's fat and dishonest uncle. They only talked to each other, and they didn't bring the rivets we needed. I disliked these hunters and thought about Mr. Kurtz, wondering if his moral ideas were still strong. One night, I overheard the manager and his uncle discussing Mr. Kurtz. They spoke about his illness and the ivory he sent. They seemed eager for him to fail and mentioned hanging someone unrelated to the company. The El Dorado expedition left later. Their donkeys died in the jungle, but I didn't know what happened to the men or their ivory. Finally, the rivets arrived, and I was excited to meet Kurtz soon. It took 2 months to reach Kurtz's station up the river. The journey felt like going back to the world's beginning, with just forests and trees. The river was wide but shallow, making navigation tough. Sometimes the steamer touched the river's bottom, and our hired cannibal crew had to push it. During our voyage, we passed sad trading stations and saw native villages. The forest's silence was often interrupted by distant drumming, whose meaning we couldn't decipher. Sometimes we encountered natives dancing by the riverbank, but we couldn't understand their intentions. Everything felt unfamiliar and intimidating, yet I felt a common humanity with the people. Even the steamer's fireman, despite his tribal background, managed the boiler without understanding its workings. About 50 miles from Kurtz's place, we found a message on a pile of wood, asking us to hurry but approach cautiously. It wasn't from Kurtz but someone else. We couldn't decode the cautionary note, but it hinted at trouble ahead. Close to Kurtz's station, a dense fog enveloped us. In the fog's eerie silence, we heard terrifying shrieks from the riverbank, causing panic among the pilgrims aboard. Some on board wondered if the natives were about to attack us in the fog. But they seemed calm. One of the cannibals even joked about eating someone if they attacked, though I wasn't as surprised. They'd been with us, eating dried meat, and were part of this primitive world. It puzzled me why they didn't attack us despite being more in number. The manager feared for Kurtz's safety, urging us to move ahead cautiously. I assured everyone that the natives, hidden in the fog, weren't showing aggression. They seemed more sorrowful than hostile. When the fog lifted, we continued our journey but soon faced an attack. Arrows flew at us from the riverbank. The helmsman's odd behavior and the sudden appearance of dark figures signaled danger. We were under attack. I tried to correct the helmsman's course, but he ignored me, and chaos erupted. The pilgrims fired their rifles, and the helmsman, struck by a spear, fell at my feet. As I took control, I sounded the steam whistle, which brought an abrupt silence to the forest. The natives, once aggressive, turned mournful. A pilgrim saw the helmsman's death and predicted Kurtz's fate, assuming he might be dead too. I felt a sense of loss, realizing I might never hear Kurtz's remarkable ideas. Marlow then paused in his narrative, gazing at us, his audience, on the deck of the Nelly. Marlow shared more about Kurtz, how the jungle consumed him, turning him into a part of it. He possessed vast amounts of ivory, calling it his own. Marlow clarified his connections to Kurtz's world, mentioning the girl he intended to marry and the station he managed. Kurtz claimed ownership over everything. Marlow tried to understand what drove Kurtz: the isolation and solitude in Africa, a life without support or civilization. Kurtz, despite his ideals, failed. He spoke English, was partly of European descent, and had written an impressive report advocating for benevolence in Africa. Yet, his final line, "Kill all the brutes," revealed his descent into darkness. Kurtz participated in abhorrent ceremonies, losing himself to the darkness. As they approached Kurtz's station, they encountered a peculiarly dressed man, seemingly Russian, who claimed to have known Kurtz. He explained the natives' hostility as a resistance against Kurtz leaving. The Russian shared his story, starting as a sailor and later becoming a trader in Africa. He credited Kurtz for expanding his mindset, emphasizing how much Kurtz meant to him. The man with the Russian accent expressed a deep loyalty and admiration for Kurtz, explaining that Kurtz had an exceptional ability to communicate profound thoughts, even though he didn't often talk to him. He detailed Kurtz's method of trading with the tribe, where Kurtz's reputation and advanced technology intimidated and influenced the natives, making them accept him. The man spoke of an incident where Kurtz threatened him for ivory but emphasized that despite this, he remained devoted to Kurtz. He described Kurtz's illness and his own attempts to persuade Kurtz to leave the jungle, only to witness Kurtz's descent into his own dark desires. The man reluctantly admitted to the skulls atop the posts surrounding Kurtz's station, indicating the gruesome extent of Kurtz's transformation. These heads were a visceral testament to the truth beneath Kurtz's eloquent moralizing, a hollow man driven by his desires, alone in the wilderness. Despite these shocking revelations, the man defended Kurtz, believing in his greatness and his incredible ideas, expressing how he attempted to care for Kurtz in dire conditions, even as Kurtz's actions became increasingly disturbing and disconnected from his initial ideals. The scene unfolded dramatically as a group of men carried Kurtz, who was weak and exhausted, back to the steamer. He attempted to give orders despite his evident physical frailty, and the forest erupted with a vast number of natives running toward the stretcher, armed with weapons. However, Kurtz managed to control the situation with a few words, and the natives dispersed into the darkness again. Kurtz was placed inside the steamer while some of his papers were carefully arranged beside him. Outside, a strikingly beautiful and proud native woman briefly approached the steamer before walking away with regal composure, leaving a lasting impression on the observers. The manager, revealing his greed and ambition, expressed dissatisfaction with Kurtz's actions, while the Russian, deeply loyal to Kurtz, attempted to defend Kurtz's reputation and begged Marlow for understanding and protection for Kurtz. Marlow, remembering Kurtz's earlier actions and conversations, realizes the true extent of Kurtz's descent into madness. He confronted Kurtz in the darkness, warning him of his impending loss, acknowledging that Kurtz was a rational being, but his soul had succumbed to the madness of the wilderness. Despite the perilous situation, Marlow carried the weakened Kurtz back to the steamer, fulfilling his unspoken promise not to betray him. The journey on the steamer continued with the tragic decline of Kurtz becoming more evident. As they departed, a large crowd of natives gathered, and Kurtz, weakened and ailing, began to speak again. His talk was laden with conflict, reflecting the struggle between his fascination with what he had discovered in the jungle and his disgust at it. The journey was interrupted by a breakdown of the steamer, and during the repairs, Kurtz's condition deteriorated rapidly. Marlow observed Kurtz's pride, power, and ultimate despair as he faced his impending death. In his final moments, Kurtz cried out about the horror, a revelation of his realization of the darkness within himself. Kurtz's death was a significant event for all on board. Marlow, who had grown strangely attached to Kurtz's enigmatic persona, found himself in a peculiar state of disillusionment upon returning to civilization. He encountered people who wanted to obtain Kurtz's papers for various reasons, each attempting to decipher the enigma of the man. The accounts from individuals who came seeking information about Kurtz portrayed different facets of his personality. Some portrayed him as a musician, others as a genius in various fields, and some praised his ability to mesmerize through his oratory skills. Marlow eventually visited Kurtz's intended, a woman still mourning his death a year later. She expressed deep admiration and love for Kurtz, cherishing his memory and considering his death a tremendous loss for the world. Their conversation circled around Kurtz's talents, character, and the profound impact he had on those who knew him. As Marlow recalled his final moments with Kurtz, the woman eagerly sought to know Kurtz's last words. Marlow hesitated to reveal the grim truth, the utterance of her name by Kurtz in his dying breath, instead choosing to speak a different, gentler last word. He recognized that the truth would be too dark and distressing for her. The tale concluded with Marlow's reflective silence, surrounded by the tranquil yet mysterious river, evoking the sense of an infinite darkness lying beyond its peaceful surface. The narrative ended with a poignant reminder of the immense depths of the human experience and the darkness that can reside within the human soul.